more faithful than you because I was circumcised as a teenager. and you were a baby, you know. But then Isaac then comes back and says, no, I'm more faithful than you because I was willing to be sacrificed. So, and that happens within Jewish tradition. So we see that we use the stories to justify our own positions, which I don't think that has changed much in the history of religion. As opposed to, instead of understanding the stories, perhaps we need to stand under the stories and let the stories explain us. But other questions or comments or perspective, Ernie?
Joe, when did this notion of the conflict between Isaac and Ishmael begin to take hold? Because from what you said, it sounds like for a long time that was not a predominant view. Do you have some sense of when it started or why that came to be a popular myth?
Well, I don't. If I had to, I've gone back to about, I think the Lindsay quote was from the 1960s. And I think it was spoken within the context of the 1967 war. My guess is that it came about mostly through Western analysis of conflicts between Jews and Muslims. I can't tell you how many websites I found that equated Muslims with Arabs, talking about them in the same way. For those who might believe that here, the majority of the world's Muslims are Asian. And we're here in a room with the Turks, who are a different clan from the Arabs. So, but there's just these, and they're stated as fact. The World Wide Web's a wonderful thing. I can find an article in the American Association of Religion that's this wonderful article, but there's also just so much garbage out there that people just print as total fact, and it's just not. So my guess is that it's been a product of the 20th century conflict of the creation of Israel and how that has affected. And there's a great book if you're interested in. Again, this would be more for folks like me who did not learn much about the Ottoman Empire at all in my Western education. I read a book called A Peace to End All Peace by a historian named David Fromkin, and it was about basically how Turkey, the Ottoman Empire, became aligned with Germany, the Austro-Hungarian Empire in World War I, basically over a mistake about the Turks building a ship for the Germans, and the British assumed that that meant that they were on the side of the Germans, so they invaded. And that then when the Axis powers lost, and the Russians and the English and the French divided up the Ottoman Empire, they created the modern Middle East. They invented countries like Iraq, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Transjordan, Syria, Lebanon, and drew up the boundaries and just kind of carved things up for them and put kings over them. It's a pretty persuasive argument that was written in the context of the Russians' war in Afghanistan in the 80s. So when I read it, that was long after that, and we were the ones in Afghanistan. It was pretty prophetic. But I think, to answer the question, I think that concept is born of the 20th century. There's been all kinds of, the Crusades, that wasn't the operating myth in the Crusades. The operating myth in the Crusades was the Franks had to come back and take the Holy Land that clearly belonged to them. And, there's a great book there called The Crusades Through Arab Eyes. I wish I could name the author, but it talks about how within Arab literature people talked about the Crusades. And within the Muslim world, the Crusaders were never called Christians, because there were Christians who lived in the Muslim world. And they knew what Christians acted like, and the Crusaders did not act like Christians. And so in all of the Muslim writings, all of the Arab writings, the The Crusaders are always referred to as the Franks, not the Christians. I think that's an interesting differentiation. Other? Yes?
It's a pleasure to be here, hear you talk, and hear people of different faith backgrounds, interacting with one another. I wondered if you have any ideas on how to get the fundamentalist fringe engaged in dialogue, whether it be Muslim fundamentalists or Christian fundamentalists or Jewish fundamentalists or Hindu fundamentalists. I mean, we got them all along the line, don't we? And I guess I'd like to hear any ideas you have about hearing that, trying to get those folks talking.
Well, I don't have any ideas about that, and it's very difficult. And one of the things is, we can get in a room like this, and because you're here tonight, we all here are going to share much more in common than I probably would with a fundamentalist Christian. And that's a strange dynamic. I have a far better, I moved here from Alpharetta, Georgia, I had a far better relationship with a Reformed Jewish rabbi than I did with the pastor at the fundamentalist church that was 2 blocks from my congregation. I'm a writer on the blog Texas Faith that Dallas News does. And they just asked a question about the comment that Britt Hume made about Tiger Woods, that he needed to give up his Buddhism and become a Christian if he really wanted to find forgiveness and redemption. And the question was, was Hume out of bounds, in what he said? There's about 30 panelists, and reading the panelists' responses was really depressing to me. Because I'd say over half of them said, truth hurts. I mean, these are really well-educated, thoughtful people for the most part. And I was just kind of like, wow.
I didn't think he was as out of bounds as he was ignorant about Buddhism and the place of forgiveness.
Well, and reading the responses of people to our comments is really depressing. But to answer your question, from a Christian perspective, we believe that something, taking it out of the realm of religion, we're on Martin Luther King weekend here. The assassination of Martin Luther King changed things. And when people who were further radical in that saw a preacher get shot and killed, it changed the climate. And people were forced to say, whoa, this is going a little too far. I think in the wake of 9/11, where in many ways the United States joined the rest of the world in terms of having terrorism affect us on that scale, for a year, I felt like we had the upper hand on the extremists because the world was wonderfully united. I was in Greece September 1st of 2002, and the Greeks are not big fans of America. There were tens of thousands of people on the streets of Athens with a candlelight vigil on the night of September 11th, 2002. Now, I would never wish for tragedy, but there is something about when something tragic happens, we can be united in ways that when we're arguing about doctrine or politics, we can't.